James Carville knew how to win, and he blamed the Democratic losses this November 2nd on stupid wokeness, to which AOC fired back that wokeness is a term almost exclusively used by older people these days. So that should tell you all you need to know. What? This is a term folks like you brought out very recently and had been proudly displaying at every march since. Just last year, The Guardian declared woke the word of our era. I guess they didn't get the memo from the Mean Girls Club. We don't use that emoji anymore. Woke, please. We say fetch now.
James Carville went on a post-election tear and basically said Democrats didn't just lose, they tripped over their own messaging, and he pinned a big chunk of it on what he called stupid wokeness. Then AOC fired back with a very modern defense. Woke is a term mostly older people use now, so the whole debate is kind of outdated. And if you're watching this thinking, okay, so which one is it? That's the point. Because this fight isn't really about a single word. It's about what the word has come to represent, who it annoys, and why it keeps showing up right after Democrats get clobbered at the ballot box. Here's what's funny. For a while, woke was used like a badge, like being awake to real problems, real history, real unfairness. Then, at some point, it flipped. It went from a rallying cry to a punchline. It's the rare political term that went from "I'm proud to be this" to "how dare you call me that" in basically one news cycle. And that's what makes AOC's response so revealing.
That said, I would love to have AOC on this show. There's so much to admire there. I was one of her first supporters for the Green New Deal idea. But that will probably never happen because Democrats don't go anywhere these days where they're not pre-adored. And that's my last bit of advice to them. Go where the amen corner isn't. Do Fox News. Be brave. Come here. Go everywhere. Winning is about expanding the electorate.
Because she's not saying the underlying ideas are wrong. She's saying the label is cringe. It's like saying, I love everything about this, just don't call it that where people can see. And that's where Bill Maher steps in, because Maher's whole brand is basically, I'm going to say the part out loud that your party refuses to say in public. He looks at AOC brushing off the term and goes, okay, but what word do you want people to use for the stuff voters clearly don't like? Because you can't keep calling it liberalism if what you're defending is something most normal people don't recognize as liberal in the classic sense. That's his core argument. He's not just arguing about vocabulary, he's arguing about identity. Maher's framing is basically this old school liberalism used to be about open debate, common sense, and persuasion. You argue, you convince, you build coalitions. The newer version, the one he keeps criticizing, is more like a moral courtroom. It's less let's debate and more repeat the correct phrases or you're a bad person. And in his view, that shift has political consequences, not just online consequences.
What a great strategy, never missing an opportunity to remind voters how lame and clueless and hopelessly uncool they are, especially since those are the ones who actually vote. But okay, fine. What word would you like us to use for the plainly insane excesses of the left that are not liberalism, but something completely different? Because you can't have that word liberal from us and think it should cover things like canceling Lincoln and teaching third graders their oppressors. That's all your new thing.
Real-world consequences. Because voters don't care how pure your language is if they feel like you're not solving problems. And then Maher hits Democrats with his simplest strategic advice, the one they refuse to follow. Stop living inside your own bubble. Go where the audience doesn't automatically clap for you. Go places where people will challenge you. If you want to win, you don't just preach to the choir. You expand the room. You get in uncomfortable conversations. You show up. That's why he constantly calls out prominent Democrats for avoiding long-form interviews where they can't control the vibe. He points out that he's tried to book big Democrats for years. Sometimes they say no. Sometimes they avoid it entirely. And his take is that fear tells you something. They don't want to sit somewhere that won't pre-approve their talking points. They don't want a real conversation. They want an audience that already agrees. But politics doesn't work like that, not if you want to win elections. Winning is about persuasion, not performance. Then Maher gets into why Democrats can support policies that should be popular and still be seen as out of touch. This is the part that stings, because it's not about a specific bill. It's about a vibe.
A more pertinent question to ask about the word woke might be, why in such a short time has it gone from a rallying cry to a pejorative? If the word only made you think of rational, deserved causes like teaching a less whitewashed version of American history, AOC would still want to own it. But it's a joke. because it makes you think of people who wake up offended and take orders from Twitter, and their oversensitivity has grown tiresome.
He basically says, people don't like being talked down to. Even if you're technically right on an issue, you can still come off like a snob. And nothing turns voters off faster than the feeling that a party cares about everyone except them. He tells the story of Democrats trying to do outreach to rural voters while operating like a brand, like it's locally sourced politics, curated and fashionable. And he mocks the idea that you can understand regular people if your entire cultural universe is filtered through a tiny set of highly online rules. His message is blunt. Politics is local. It's not a costume. You actually have to show up and talk like a human being. That's where he goes after what he calls microaggression culture and the obsession with language that doesn't land outside certain activist spaces. He says, in the Rust Belt, people aren't voting based on whether you use the newest approved term. They're voting based on whether their town feels safer, whether their pay covers their bills, and whether their leaders sound like they live on the same planet. And this is where the script gets into the specific examples that keep becoming memes. Maher points to Democrats swapping common words for clinical phrases, especially around gender. He argues that when voters hear phrases like menstruating people or birthing people, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like politics being turned into a sociology seminar. And his point isn't that people should be cruel or exclusionary. His point is that a party trying to win a national election cannot afford to talk in a way that makes the average person feel like they need a glossary just to watch the news. He expands that into a bigger critique. Democrats have let a small set of activists set the tone for the entire party's public language. So instead of sounding like a party for workers, families, and everyday life, they end up sounding like a party of internal HR memos. And to Maher, that's electoral poison. Then he goes after what he sees as a participation trophy mindset. The argument here is more cultural than political. If you raise people in a system where every outcome is celebrated and every criticism is treated as harm, you end up producing leaders and staffers who can't handle losing, can't handle pushback, and can't handle the reality that persuasion requires conflict.
People ask me all the time, why haven't you ever had Hillary or Bill Clinton on? Why didn't you have Kamala on during the last campaign? You think we don't ask? We ask these people every week. They say no. It took 8 years and a petition to get Obama on. And these are people, all people I voted for. Think about that. They're afraid to come on the show of a guy who voted for them. The Republicans? They show up.
He says you can't build a winning political operation with people who treat disagreement as violence. He also criticizes how Democrats sometimes talk about hiring and representation, arguing that when voters feel like competence is being replaced by box checking, they lose trust. Whether that perception is fair or not, it exists, and in politics, perception becomes reality very quickly. And that's the pattern he keeps pointing to. Democrats often start with a moral goal that sounds fine, then overshoot into messaging that feels disconnected from normal life, and then act shocked when voters walk away. Maher also hits them on priorities. He argues that Democrats can be loud and passionate about big symbolic causes, but weirdly hesitant about fixing problems that are directly in front of Americans, like infrastructure, safety, or the daily cost of living. He gives an example of Democrats voting against a major spending bill because it didn't go far enough in a separate policy area. His criticism is practical. Even if you want more, why reject improvements that would help your own constituents right now? Why turn perfect into the enemy of better? He paints a picture of voters watching this and thinking, I agree with you on some big issues, but my subway is flooding, my commute is falling apart, my town needs repairs, and you're treating real improvements like they're not worth it unless they satisfy every demand at once. That's the purity test critique. Then he moves to abortion messaging, and this is where he says Democrats made a strategic mistake by letting language politics contaminate an issue that already has high emotional stakes. For years, abortion rights were framed as women's rights. Maher argues that when Democrats started avoiding the word women in that context, in order to be as inclusive as possible, it created confusion and backlash. Not because most voters are hateful, but because most voters understand politics through simple moral framing.
You can give the people all the goodies Joe Manchin will allow, and it doesn't seem to buy their love. Why? Why is the party that supports so many issues that benefit the middle class still considered out of touch by 62% of Americans? In plain English, nobody likes a snob. Hillary Clinton didn't have anyone on rural research or outreach when she ran in 2016 until the race tightened just before the election. Then they hired one. And where was his office? Brooklyn. True story. Politics is local, not locally sourced. It's not artisan. It's art and Stan.
And when you complicate the framing, you weaken the message. He also mocks how online culture can take a rare edge case, turn it into a central talking point, and then demand that everyone treat it as the new default. And in his view, that's not compassionate politics, it's self-sabotage. He basically says, you can protect people's rights and dignity without letting a tiny slice of online discourse rewrite how you talk about basic reality in public. That's the through line of his whole rant. He's not telling Democrats to abandon compassion. He's telling them to stop turning compassion into performance art that alienates the middle of the country. And then he brings in what he sees as the ultimate proof, voter shifts that used to be unthinkable. He points to districts and communities that were reliably Democratic flipping the other way, and he says the party needs to stop pretending that's just voters being bad. In his view, it's voters sending a message, focus on us, speak to our lives, stop acting like we're an obstacle you have to educate. He puts it in a blunt metaphor.
To a lot of folks in America, you come across as the cares about everybody but me party. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can find ways to stand up for these folks without being David Duke. This month, when the Democrats finally passed their big $1 trillion bill to rebuild our roads and bridges, 6 Democrats voted no because it didn't go far enough to address climate change, which I'm sure is true. What does? But this was free money from the federal government that would actually improve their constituents' lives. I can see a voter saying, you know, squad, I agree with you on climate change. But as long as it is happening, we also need money for getting the water pumped out of the subway.
Voters want a representative who feels like their lawyer, not someone auditioning to be the lawyer for every global cause at the expense of the people who actually live in the district. That's a harsh way to say it, but it's the kind of line that sticks because it turns politics into something personal and understandable. So when you zoom out, Maher's critique isn't really AOC bad or woke bad as a slogan. It's this: Democrats keep confusing moral certainty with political strategy. They keep confusing online applause with electoral support. They keep choosing language battles that make them look disconnected, and then acting confused when the public reacts like, who are you even talking to? He's basically warning them that you can't run a national party like a private club. You can't demand that voters adopt a constantly changing set of cultural rules just to earn the right to agree with you. And you can't build coalitions if you only show up where everyone already loves you. If Democrats want to win, the argument goes, they need to do 3 boring, unglamorous things. First, talk like normal people again, especially on issues where clarity matters. Second, prioritize practical improvements people can feel, even if those improvements aren't ideologically perfect. Third, stop treating disagreement as a personal attack and start treating it like the reality of democracy. Because the voters Maher is talking about aren't sitting around asking for a seminar. They're asking for leadership that feels grounded. They're asking for a party that doesn't come off as embarrassed by them. They're asking for a party that can defend rights without acting like common sense is a threat. And that's why this whole woke argument keeps coming back after every election. Not because the word matters, but because the drift matters. The drift from persuasion to performance. The drift from policy to language policing. The drift from building coalitions to enforcing in-group rules. You can agree with Maher or hate him, but his warning is easy to understand. If your politics starts sounding like it was written for the internet instead of written for real people, the internet will clap and the voters will leave. That's the point of the whole segment. Democrats didn't lose because Americans suddenly became cruel. They lost in this critique because the party let itself become culturally out of sync with the people it needs to win. And until that changes, the same fight will replay over and over again with the same shocked reactions and the same post-election blame game.